Hi, this is John Bolwero. I am running Asahi Linux on my MacBook, which really works amazingly. And what I'd like to show you is been asked several times how I set up my KDE desktop because I usually set it up a special way. So I'm going to take you through this. Most of what I use works on the MacBook on the ARM M2 that I currently am on. Things like temperature sensors are not always direct, and also sound doesn't work. So I have this USB headset. Bluetooth does work, you can see down here. Microphone, Bluetooth do work fine, but I used a wired headset to try that. So what I've got is a brand new session with a default user config, right? This is Fedora 39. I'm running Xorg because quite a few of the things I do are still broken in Wayland, and the Wayland push keeps going forward. So I'm going to show you some things that will require Xorg or X11 and may not work in Fedora 40, which I believe is going to require Wayland, mandate Wayland. So have a look at this. I'm going to minimize myself and take you through the steps of what I do. Right. So straight away, I've configured my user with an avatar, a picture, which is easy to do. If you are not familiar with KDE, if you're actually a MacBook user or a Windows user, one of the reasons I love KDE is that honestly, the dirty secret is if you had taken Windows XP and stuck with it, kept the design themes and just kind of evolved them, made them more modern. In my mind, that's what KDE did, right? KDE was designed back around the same time as not just Windows XP, but even prior. Some of the user elements based on Qt framework are really taking the best bits of Windows XP, the best operating system we had, when the rest of the world and Microsoft went with Vista and essentially threw away the entire user interface and gave us a bunch of garbage, right? Nobody liked a lot of operating systems since Windows XP transition to Windows Vista. So KDE really puts this back in perspective here. Now, one of the things it does right off the bat that GNOME still has a hard time with is, guess what? We're in a widescreen world. I don't want this banner to be on the bottom. I don't want the toolbar to be on the bottom. I want it to be on the side always, right? Why waste all that vertical space with toolbars? Right now, I believe I'm on a 4K mode. This will default, Linux will default actually to the full screen mode, the maximum resolution. So I'm going to widen this panel just to where I like it. Keep in mind, I've got the default config here, so it has a digital clock. One of the things that you can do right off the bat again is add, first of all, take away a lot of these task menu icons because that's a waste of space. And what I'd like to do is add some widgets to get me more information, right? Widget library is really extensive here. First of all, I add an analog clock, put it right there. I will correct the time zone and also use this digital clock below it, a separate widget, to, sorry, not edit mode, to actually tell me a lot more. If I work with teams in other time zones, I want to be able to show them. So show seconds, show seconds in the analog clock. I want to display the time zone as city. I want to add time zones to it. So namely, I've got London by default. I want to add Paris because I'm going to work with teams in Paris. I work with teams in Israel. I can't spell Israel. I work with teams in Dubai. And I also have a team in New York that I'll be speaking with. Oops, sorry, New York. And I've got family in the Chicago and LA area. Right, so now once I've added these all, if I scroll down actually at the bottom, switch displayed time zone by scrolling over the clock applet. This is super helpful, right? And I also want to potentially add some holidays. One of the things you can do with the calendar app is add a holiday schedule. So I want to always show the time zone because I'm going to flick back and forth quite a bit. I can see that again by default it will show the London time on analog clock, and I can scroll now. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dubai, the time zones that I've selected. So again, if I do a screen recording like this, you can obviously see when and where it is. In fact, default to London. Now, again, once I've got that scheduled up, and again, I'm able to switch back and forth between time zones and the people I work with. Again, first of all, I'm going to replace this desktop with something a little more jazzy, right? I may use a corporate wallpaper. Again, if you're familiar with the Windows XP style settings, you can do an image, you can do picture of the day, or any of the plugins that are available on the KDE marketplace, right? Now, I'll pick this actually from the prior version of Fedora that I really liked. One thing that, again, is only available if you're using Xorg, and I've installed, is the Fusion icon. Use Compiz. A lot of people think Compiz is dead. Compiz still works very well, right? What this does is replace your desktop essentially with a 3D rendered, and this is all being rendered by the Metal GPU as we speak. So get special effects. You get things like the desktop cube, the desktop sphere, any settings that you've got in your syncs from your home directory and a prior install. All of that is here, right? So things like desktop cube, wobbly windows, and also the Emerald themes. Those come across very well. Now, again, the desktop background, what I'm going to use here. Sorry, on a 4K screen, I can barely click those. I'm going to, that's my simple screen recorder, add more widgets, this time to the desktop. So one thing I always want to do is CPU core usage, right? So right away, this picks up all 10 of the Apple M2 cores. And I always, prior versions of KDE, we'll see what happens when 6 releases. The alpha is out now. Prior versions of KDE used to default this to a line graph, line chart actually, and that's much more helpful, right? So I get to see trends over time. Automatic Y data range, so there's going to be a, first of all, if I do a stacked charts, that means that a 10-core CPU, it will leave 1,000% of CPU capacity. Okay, so keep in mind, in fact, I'll set this manually, 1,000%. So that's 10 cores of the CPU. I can see the usage. I can see that actually the labels really block up the display, so I'll turn that off as well. So sensors legend. And now I get to see if my CPU is working unexpectedly, or I get to see my performance a little better. I wouldn't drive a car without a speedometer, right, or a odometer. So one of the things I always like to enable is that. Now, again, this chart is actually a little bit misleading. Right now it's recording the screen, right? So it's actually transcoding this into VP8, I believe, in software. So it's doing what it can. It's not normally going to be loaded like that. That's a live feature of effectively not using the GPU to encode this video. But the speed of the clocks, the CPU clock speed, is not factored in here, right? So if I'm running at low power mode, maybe at half speed, this is only going to reflect if the CPU is on or off, right? This doesn't actually reflect the maximum performance. So that's always one tricky part of this widget, which I actually made a custom version that I need to publish someday, which takes into account the actual CPU speed and its utilization, right? Because if you're in battery mode, you're trying to conserve battery, your CPU will go slower, but it will still be used to its maximum extent. Okay. Now, again, I would like to add one more. I always want to add temperature. Temperature sensors, RAM utilization, memory usage, right? Again, disk utilization if you choose. Why they pick this to be a circle gauge, I'm not sure. Always again default to a line chart. I want to see trends over time, memory usage. Okay, so I've got the 16 gig model, 5 gigs used, and I think no swap. One more widget. And I would like to add a, again, I think this temperature is not supported yet in here because I don't think the sensors are fully readable. On an Intel or an x86 or a commonplace Linux desktop, you can usually not just list an individual CPU socket, but actually individual cores, GPU, and anything that reports a standard temperature sensor, right? So network activity. Again, if I suddenly see this network usage spike and I'm not doing anything, I might want to check IO top, see what's using that. And again, standard network down here. I'm going to potentially have a VPN that I can add there as well. That's standard. I can, one thing I want to do, configure system tray. Always show all entries because I like to see those. Printing is down here. One thing I would do right off the bat again is use KDE Connect, one of the most underrated features of KDE Connect. Connect your phone, connect your tablet, connect your other PCs using KDE Connect, and then you can immediately share pictures, video, files, whatever, across those networks. All you have to do is hit pair, connect the device. It doesn't have to be Bluetooth. In fact, it can be, it's just over Wi-Fi, and then that establishes that relationship with your other devices. Very handy. That includes things like media playback, file sharing, and also notifications. So if you want to ping your phone, you can't find it in your house or in your room, ping your phone, it'll beep. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned, remember this is still running in Compass, so I have the desktop sphere. I can do anything here. I can adjust the themes with the Emerald Themer. I can enable plugins. I can use 3D windows. I can also use some of the plugins that we have for debugging and potentially accelerating certain use cases like image and text processing with a GPU. I don't think I'm going to use those because I don't think the Metal GPU fully supports that yet. One thing that is as nice, again, OpenGL fully works on this, right? Apple has deprecated effectively OpenGL. Fedora, in this case, Asahi revives that, so we have access to OpenGL, which is great. This is actually something that wasn't meant to be done with the hardware, but it works out of the box fairly well. You also can do OpenCL is limited. Actually, it can't do OpenCL. Unfortunately, there's no Metal version of OpenCL drivers yet. Also, I've noticed I've done some inference on this. Right, I've done some inference with the Apple M2 using Llama, and it will only go as fast as the CPU. Right, so it's only going to use the CPU cores, at least in my experience, until there's a Linux-compatible Metal version or build. So in case of like a Mistral model, I've done some inference as a benchmark. It works about 15 or so tokens per second on CPU, and quite a bit more, potentially 20 and plus with the Metal GPU. So if I want to do a benchmark, if I want to do a shader toy actually works very, very well. This is amazing that you get this kind of performance out of an ARM GPU on Fedora Linux. Maybe it's a little choppy because of the screen recording, but it does generally perform very well natively, right? So this is essentially using GLSL in the browser. So performance of the GPU is fantastic. If I were to say Atlantis web test, whatever, Atlantis, there's an Atlantis shader toy, widget for OpenGL in the browser. Try it out. It works great. Again, fully compatible. I'm really impressed, and this now makes, in my book, the ARM M2 and the ARM M3, Apple's really purely Apple laptops, serious competitors in the Linux space, right? So now I can do native Docker and Podman containers. I can do Kubernetes native on my ARM, just like I could on an old Intel MacBook, right? So kudos to the Asahi team. My hat's off. You've done an amazing job, and I'm really impressed with how it come out. If anybody's curious, this installs from macOS without any kind of boot media required. It does a dual boot, right? So it resizes your partition and then presents you another option. So it'll make room for a new partition that you install Linux on, reboot, and then essentially configure the bootloader to be able to let you switch by holding down the power key. Super powerful, really clear cut, well done, and I'm really impressed. So this is going to be my new machine, effectively doing dual boot OS X 14 and Fedora. I'm just my biggest fear again is that Fedora 40 is going to kill off Xorg X11. Anyway, thank you. I hope you found this useful. If you ever were curious how I did my desktop setup or my Fedora setup in KDE, this is the tip of the iceberg. There's a few more features I could show maybe in a more advanced talk. But in the meantime, all of the apps that you love and use on Fedora are here. There's native support and ARM builds for just about anything, thanks to the community. And again, I can't be happier. This is a fantastic distribution and a fantastic way to use a MacBook. So cheers, kudos.